I have a lot of friends that never ever made it home from the parties. They never made it home. They ended up dead. And not one or two, it's dozens.
Welcome to Fatherhood Voices, breaking the toxic cycle. Dive in as real dads bear all, the mess-ups, make-ups, and every heartfelt moment in between. It's raw, it's real, and it might just change the way you see family.
This episode is sponsored by Aloha Imports, the sprays that make your worst-smelling secrets disappear. Listen, I love people, but I don't love their shoes or their oops, I ate a burrito bathroom breaks. And I really don't love pretending I don't smell it. That's why I keep Aloha Imports products in the house, in my car, honestly, probably in every bag I own. They've got Sweet Feet for foot funk, Shoe Fly for that one pesky fly, Smoke Off for smoke clouds that linger like your last situationship, and Crapper Zapper for the bathroom situation. You know the one. Aloha Imports doesn't cover it up with flowers and lies. They end it, silently, like a tropical ninja with a vendetta. So if you live with roommates, pets, or anyone who eats food and then, processes that food, you need this. Go to alohaimports.com, stock up, and enjoy living in a house that doesn't smell like a regret.
Welcome to another edition of Fatherhood Voices. So now we're in season 2 and episode 2. This is episode 57, 58, somewhere there. It doesn't matter, right? Alyssa, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. So I'm recording this episode from Las Vegas, and we had a live episode that we actually recorded a couple of days ago, but we had some computer glitches.
Yep. Unfortunately, so here we are re-recording. Hopefully this one is even better.
I think they're all good, but right now the only thing that's standing in the way of the roulette table and the craps table is this episode. So let's get this show on the road so I can get back.
Wow. So I'm the problem.
downstairs. Yes. Well, that's been an ongoing problem over the last 30 plus years, but that's okay.
Anyways, moving on to the episode.
Moving on to the episode. So today I want to do something special, and I wanted to go ahead and take some questions that came in from different followers over the last couple of months. And one of the things that keeps coming up is it started a couple months ago when I got a message from an old friend of mine that has a 13-year-old daughter, and she wants to start dating. And so he reached out and he said, "Hey, Edward, why don't you do an episode on when a child, or let me rephrase that, when parents should allow their children to start dating?" And his daughter's 13. And there was some conversation that went back and forth. And I don't even know if there was some disagreements between him and his wife, but about letting her go on a date. And that, so that was one actual message that came in. And then other ones that just started coming in sporadically over the last couple of months about when is it okay for children to start dating. So I thought this would be a great topic to talk about and to get the perspective of a father, but then also the perspective of the daughter. Since, do you remember being back in your 13, 14, 15? Because you are older now, a lot older.
I'm not that much older, but okay.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
13 to me is pretty young. And, if I think back to my pre-narcissistic days, probably would have been 18 or 21. But now that a lot of plant medicine has washed away a lot of the ego or narcissistic behaviors, I say that I'm leaning more towards 15, 16 years old is a proper age to date.
I agree. I think 13 is too young for me. I think that at this point I would be more with that 15, 16 as a more comfortable starting point for possible dating. But one thing I do take from my experience is that there should be an open conversation about this, because we need to talk about what dating actually means. What does dating mean for kids that are 13, 14, or even high school age from 15 to 18? And that is different from what maybe your dating was when you were in high school. And that's you ask a girl out and you take them on a date and you date and then you become boyfriend and girlfriend. But nowadays, sometimes it's as simple as I say you're my girlfriend and you say you're my boyfriend and now we're dating. And you hang out or you're around each other in school. And so I don't think that 13 would be a good age, not an appropriate age to start dating, but I do think that conversations need to happen because regardless if you think that your child is not dating or not interacting with other people, any type of hanging out or dating atmosphere, they probably are.
Well, I just caught something you said. Well, dating's different from when you were younger. So what are you saying? That I just grabbed a club and I would go into the cave and just pick out a girl, hit her over the head and said, "You're mine," and grab her by the hair and pull her out, and she's not my
Didn't you?
date?
Isn't that not what you did?
Wow.
Didn't you ride the dinosaur to your date? I don't
Wow. I'm gonna let that one go.
no, but it's really different. It is different though. Like the simplicity of dating sometimes is just you say that you're boyfriend and girlfriend and you're just hanging out and you could be the best child with the most strict parents and that might not stop you. So I
So
think that
you
that
didn't so you didn't pull them around and say, "Hey, like, hey, do you want to go around?"
go round.
Yeah,
What
do you
is
want to
that?
go?
That those are like really old
Date?
terms. Don't
Wow.
that's not nobody uses that anymore.
Okay, what do you just do? You just use Snapchat now and then just
I
send some
I don't know. I've
just
heard. I wasn't dating at that
messages
age.
and then, oh, okay, got it.
I just heard.
But you do bring up a good point. You bring up a point about actually what is dating because um, I know specifically some messages did come around about letting your daughters date at 13 years old. And yeah, what is dating? Is dating actual? You actually have a boyfriend, or is it just going and hanging out with friends? Because I do not think that a 13-year-old should be dating. I think maybe it's okay for them to go to the movies with, well, yes and no. I think it's okay for them to go, but there should be a chaperone. There should be a chaperone.
Okay,
And it
wait.
should
So
be um, the father. And
if the father is in the picture, okay, I think I see what you're saying. I feel this way too of if
or the older
the
brother
and if the older brother's not around, just a
and
chaperone
the
and
uncle.
the what?
The uncle.
Yes, if they are present and if you have an uncle. But I see where you're going with the if okay, so what I said was whether you want to accept it or you like it or not, your children can be doing this behind your back. That's just part of understanding how kids work and that you're not always
You're
in
saying
control
that
of
kids would go behind their parents' back and do something? No, that
stuff.
doesn't happen in this day and
Yes.
age.
I don't I wouldn't know, but I'm just saying that I've heard other people's experience that they would do that. So, I mean, I was fine. I was an angel, but like I had friends.
You were an
So,
angel.
yes, I was. And if they're going to ask and it's something that they want to do and don't think that they won't do it behind your back, maybe allow them the opportunity to have a chaperone. Maybe allow them to go to the movies with the chaperone date. Or maybe don't let it be the movies, let it be somewhere else like a Dave and Buster's or going out to eat or something that's more chaperoned where it's more of a hangout. But I think that there needs to be a conversation about what the expectation of that means. And it's not necessarily that it's dating, it's more of hanging out or just letting them go out with friends, but having that chaperoned so that the intimacy of like a date gets taken away and it's more of
The
a
intimacy. There's going
casual.
to be no fucking
Oh my
intimacy
God, that's
at
not what
13
I
years old.
meant, Dad.
Okay, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Here's okay. I'm going to answer this question because we're dancing around it, and this is bullshit. At 13 years old, your daughter should not be fucking dating. Plain and simple. Okay. So let's put a stop to this once and for all. So for those of you that send a message out, 13 years old is too fucking early. It's too young. It should not happen. Plain and simple.
Okay. Okay, yes, plain and simple, but let's back up though.
There's no
The
but.
dates
At
are gonna
13
be
years old,
kids though.
there is no dating.
I know
Period.
there's
Okay.
what?
If
I'm
you're going
just
to ask the question, there's no dating at 13, there's no dating at 14, and not even at 15. 16 minimum age. That's what I say. And that's what I'm going to stick by.
Yes, I understand that, but I'm just giving the perspective of somebody who grew up in a more, I'm not a Gen Z, but I'm a late millennial. So I'm just saying somebody who is closer to the current time, not your time, which was a long time ago, almost prehistoric. I am just appealing to what the kids are feeling. And, I did go to school, so I do provide um, some interesting perspectives or some things that can be helpful. All I'm saying is have a conversation, talk to your children. And
And
if you
let them
talk
know
to them,
13 years old is too young. So knock that shit off and end the conversation. We're not dating at 13. We're not dating at 14. We're not dating at 15. End the story.
okay, but you still need to have the conversation.
Have the conversation that the dating's not going to happen until you're 16 years old.
But don't have the conversation when they're in high school. Don't even have the conversation when they're already full blown in middle school. If you're having the conversation then, it's way too late. Set up your boundaries, let them know what is appropriate age for them to start dating and what age it's not and what is not appropriate, just so that you give them an idea going in. This is what is allowed and this is what isn't allowed. And this is what dating looks like and this is what it's not going to be.
And if you choose to date at 13, 14, or 15, and you do it behind your parents' back, that there's going to be serious consequences. That's how we're going to protect our daughters. Because in the end, they're pregnant.
Why do you always go to the worst case scenario? That doesn't mean that they're going to end up pregnant.
Well, we just want to make sure that we're being proactive instead of reactive.
Well, if you want to talk about them getting pregnant, then you got to have that conversation, that special conversation, way earlier than high school. Sorry, parents, but if you're talking to them when they're in high school, it is way too late. But that is a story for another podcast, and that is a whole other topic for another podcast. But seriously, just talk to your kids.
Well, no, wait a minute. Let's talk about the conversation we had about the birds and the bees when you were younger. That was a
Okay.
pretty interesting conversation.
No.
Do you
I'm so
remember
sorry.
that? I would love to just open up this call since we're talking about dating and
I
being
don't.
proactive about having conversations.
You
Let's
know,
talk about the birds and the bees.
this wasn't on the last podcast that we recorded, so all I am gonna leave it at is that was a very awkward conversation, and you kind of talked to me, but also like there were YouTube videos involved of like other people talking to their parents or to their
And
children
cartoons. And cartoons.
and
There were
cartoons.
YouTube cartoons about having sex. Yeah, that's what I did, people.
You did
I
education.
sat her down and I pulled up YouTube videos and cartoons and other videos to demonstrate how a baby was made in order to be proactive.
Yeah, it was the
True
most
story.
uncomfortable. I don't even think it was an hour, but we'll call it an hour because it felt like an hour of my life.
Well, you're sitting here saying we need to be proactive. So, especially now with AI, I'm sure there's some pretty cool birds and bees videos out there that can be
That's
shared with kids.
if you don't know what to tell your child, you can always turn to AI or turn to educational videos. But one thing that I would just put in there is maybe just have a follow up. For sure, have a follow up conversation with them because that's something that we didn't really have. Also, I felt really awkward. So we never went back to the topic. It was like we talked about it one time and then it was just left at that. Um, Create an open, safe space for your child and yourself to have that conversation. That's the most important thing. It has to be a judgment free, safe space where they feel like they can come to you and talk to you about anything. And even though that one's a tough one, better to start talking about it early.
I honestly think that even before you have the conversation, kids already know about the birds and the bees. And do we need to change the birds and bees and just really call it what it is?
They do. They are getting influences in school around
Well, they're
different
teaching it in
people.
school. And if sure, I can definitely tell you that the boys are sitting around on the playground and they're talking about, you know, wanting to poke a girl.
Oh my
I
God.
mean, it's real conversation that happen. I mean, it is. It's inappropriate, but it's conversations that little boys have. Not little boys, but teenage boys have.
Okay, I can see that. Um, your child is getting education from somewhere, and not every school has a sex ed class because I didn't have one of those. Like I just didn't. We got the prevention of STDs and this is what it looks like, so don't do it, but that's as much as I had, whereas, like, my sisters, they had a full-on family planning, family health, whatever it was, class, so we can't assume that they're learning proper education, but just know that there are a lot of influences with their friends and people around, so if you're not talking to them about it, they're learning and they are hearing about it from somebody.
So here's the thing. I know we're kind of making light of the subject, but the reality, in all seriousness, have the conversation with your kids about sex and do it when you honestly feel that you're starting to see these signs that that's starting to be talked about. Have the conversation sooner than later. And like I said, I even say that you should probably have the conversation when they're a lot earlier because especially, you know what? Especially because sometimes there's inappropriate behavior. And then we're not going to really open that door of the conversation, but they need to know what's right and what's wrong. They need to know what's proper behavior and what's improper behavior. And not just amongst boys, amongst their friends, because they can be boys or girls, but even just amongst family members, yeah, amongst family friends and so forth. So I think at, at a very early age, letting them know what's appropriate, what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And I'm just going to use, something from culture and not to dive too much into opening this door of abuse and so forth. But, in the Hispanic culture, and I'm sure other cultures, I remember a time when, if you would have an uncle or aunt come over and say, oh, come over here, give me a hug, give me a kiss, sit on my lap. And if the child didn't do it, they would get scolded because it was like, no, that's your uncle, or that's your aunt, come over there, sit on their lap, give them a hug. But, as I've grown into on my journey, I realized that you shouldn't allow your child, if your child feels uncomfortable, I don't care if they're 2, 3 years old. If the child's not comfortable giving them a hug or or giving them a kiss, don't make them. It's not okay. Respect your children's boundaries, even if they're little children. Don't make them go and sit on their elbow. It's fucking creepy, to be honest with you.
Okay. Well, okay, you bring up a good point. It's teaching them the value of their voice. If they're not comfortable with something, even if it's as innocent as it is, and most of the time it can be innocent, allow them to have their voice and don't shut down what they're saying. If they're not comfortable with doing it and they say no, let that be okay.
This topic, man, it brings up a podcast that happened with the guest that I had on sometime last year. Her name was Christy. And it brings up the whole topic of an exercise she was able to put in place in order to find out that her 6-year-old daughter was being touched inappropriately by her father. And I want to bring this up because it's an exercise that she did, something that she created in order to expose it. And I think this is a great time for those of you that haven't seen that episode. It was called the Pinky Promise. Okay. And I'm kind of paraphrasing, but basically, her daughter was very uncomfortable going with her father, and they were going through a separation and so forth. But the daughter wouldn't share. And the mom knew like something's wrong. Something's not right. Every time she wants to go to the father, she shuts down, she cries, she doesn't want to go. Just out of the blue, I believe it was Thanksgiving time that the daughter was going to go with the dad and she didn't want to go. And so she said, so she called her into the room. And like I said, I'm paraphrasing this. You're paraphrasing it of what actually happened. But it was something to this effect. She called her and says, look, let's play a game. We're going to play Pinky Promise. And you can tell me anything you want. And it's going to be our promise. It's going to be our Pinky Promise. And so then the little girl decided to play this game, a Pinky Promise. And so they did a Pinky Promise. She said, you can tell me anything, and you're not going to get in trouble, and I'm not going to tell anybody. And then they did this pinky promise. So it's just something that she just pulled out of thin air, and they did this. And that's when the little girl shared that her dad had been touching her inappropriately, and the bomb just dropped. And then at that moment, she knew something was going on, but wasn't sure. And then she says, "Oh, wait a minute!" And her mom was there, the grandmother. And she said, "Can we call grandma in, and can you share the pinky promise also?" And so then she shared it, and then the grandma is the one that started the process involving the authorities. So the mom still respected the pinky promise and never broke that promise with her daughter, but then it was the grandmother that initiated everything. And from that, we created a whole workbook called the Pinky Promise, and it's a handbook. And you can go to edwarddarty.com or even on Instagram, and you can click on the link, and there's and the free tools and resources you can download. It's like a 6 to 8 page workbook on how to initiate the Pinky Promise. And just as we started having this conversation, it reminded me about that, and why it's important to really, and whether it's a pinky promise or something else, come up with a game with your children, especially at a young age, so that they know they have a safe space to be able to share things that are going on. And it may not even be inappropriate behavior. It could be foul language or sort of physical abuse or other things that are going on. So that triggered that moment. And I know that for my granddaughter, for Bella and your niece, I know that's something that I'm already starting to teach her is pinky promise, pinky promise. And as she gets a little bit older, you bet you goddamn right, whatever. What I'm trying to say is you better know that I'm going to teach her that we're going to have this pinky promise, and she's going to be able to come to me and tell me anything. And oh, let me tell you, if something ever happens to her that shouldn't, oh, there's going to be some consequences, and we're just going to leave it at that. But that's
I think that that's a great thing to start with your kids. I think at a young age, there are a lot of tools nowadays that you can find, and you can always go and look them up. And maybe this is even something for us to develop. And it's the education between children as they age, from being school age to going up to middle school to high school, and just teaching them using their voice, what's appropriate, what's inappropriate, learning their body, and learning how to speak about those things. But I definitely think that that's something that you should start with your children from a young age.
no, absolutely. And like I said, just to get away from this topic, but whether it's a pinky promise or worth something else, create that safe space for your children to be able to come to you and share. And if they come to you and say that they're being touched inappropriately or something's going on, don't fucking shame them. Don't shame them, and don't sit here and fucking cast blame on them like it's their fault. Okay? Because what you're doing is you're diluting the trust and you're diluting the relationship. Because if they're coming to you in trust and sharing with you, and then you're going to sit here and deny and step into that role of deniability, you're going to deny. No. That didn't happen that way. Then what's going to happen is they're going to suppress it and they're going to hold it in.
That's true. How are we going to transition out of this?
What's that?
I said, how are we going to transition out of this?
We're transitioning out of this right now, and we're going to move into something else because this.
I don't know how to transition from that, but okay. I'll let you lead on that.
Well,
You had it, but you didn't take it.
What's that?
Okay, you had a transition earlier, but okay, yeah, just keep going. I don't know.
We're not editing. We're not editing this, so this is live. So there's no edit. This is all live.
No, there is edit.
No, there is no editing. We are transitioning now from dating, and then we did uncover a little bit of just going into the sex education talk, going into a little bit inappropriate touching and so forth. But now we're gonna kind of lighten up the mood, and I want to talk about a situation that happened. Now, before I go that, what about when your kids come home and they've been drinking? Because that's something that's coming up Because what do we have right now? It's April. People are going to proms right now, and people are getting ready to they're going to be graduating, and they're going to be going to graduation parties and, the grad nights and so forth. So alcohol is something that's going to show up in a lot of families' households. And how do you navigate around that? How do you navigate around your underage children drinking, and what's okay and what's not okay? Because of course the law says if you're under 21, you can't drink. But we know that some of our high school, and not even just high school, but even junior high school, some of our kids are going to drink. And where's that fine line of educating them? Well, number one, educating them, but also having consequences around it. Because now you have your children that are drinking, okay, young adults. And then what about when they have licenses and cars? And now you add in the whole dynamic of the car and them driving buzzed or driving drunk, intoxicated, and them not knowing how to regulate the body because they're new to this and not knowing how much alcohol is too much, and then driving, and then God forbid an accident happen, or they get in an accident, or they, hurt themselves or hurt somebody else. So yeah, alcohol, great topic to segue into, especially now that people are going to proms and people are getting ready to graduate, and there's going to be a lot of grad parties, and unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of alcohol. And we're not even going to open up the whole can of drugs because that's a whole nother topic. Let's just stick on the alcohol. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, again, you need to have those conversations with your kids about not drinking, and also uh, being prepared for peer pressure, because it does happen. If you're allowing your kids to go out, and especially if it's to anyone's house or parties, or I mean, I wasn't allowed to go to parties, so I wouldn't know. But especially when they're going to dances, and not just prom, but other dances too, to understand that if you think that there's not going to be alcohol there, then you are tricking yourself, because sometimes there is. And also the thing of, would you even allow your child at a certain age to try alcohol before they're the age of 21? Just so that you can see how they respond to it, and what age would be appropriate to do that.
It's funny that you mentioned that because we had, you know, when I was growing up, I remember being 10, 11 years old and going to Tijuana with my aunts and uncles, and whether it was for a festivity or a family celebration, and then they would let us have a beer. One of my aunts would let us have a beer, and just one, but I think it was more just to um, so you could see what it felt like, but just so you learn not to abuse it. It's just kind of a cultural thing because in Mexico, there's really no age. You could drink. I think they say that you're supposed to be 14 or 16, but anybody can drink.
What?
And I remember like, oh my gosh, I would come back from this weekend in Tijuana and be like, oh yeah, I had a tecate. And I thought it was so cool and so forth. But it also made me realize that it's not something that, in the moment, but it's not something that I really gravitated towards. But then I started thinking about, what about culturally, where families allow their kids to eat, to drink, and I'll say like in the European cultures, wine is just a natural part of dinner, family dinner, especially Sunday dinners. And not only do the adults indulge in wine, but also the children. It's just cultural. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I can see with families that allow their kids to drink alcohol, um, because it's a culture, and it's something you pair the wine with the meal, and that's just the way that you have your meals. I want to believe, I mean, I would assume that they would come in with an even bigger education with alcohol, because they're used to having it and in moderation. But when you come from a culture that doesn't allow you to drink until you're 21, then that's where, if there's no conversations happening, that's where it can get a little dangerous if they're having alcohol for the first time outside of the home.
I know in my mind, I think in our home, I was always under the mindset that If you're going to drink at the house. Because I'd rather, if you're going to go on and do it anyways, I'd rather you do it at the house. So at least we are not only responsible for you, but in case, we could regulate, like making sure you didn't drink too much or making sure that you didn't get in an accident or something, and I don't mean driving, but I mean falling or you having alcohol intox, poisoning or something, and then I was like, you know what, if you and your friends are going to drink, then just come over to the house and drink. And I know that wasn't legal, but I would rather have it been done. And then that's the mindset of a lot of parents is, if you're going to go out and drink, then just do it here. At least you're in a safe place, and we can go ahead and monitor the activities. And I'm not saying, to condone it, because of course that opens a lot of liability, and something goes wrong, and not only from a financial perspective, but also it was just so not even financial, but just even a whole nother dynamic of criminal prosecutions and so forth that could happen, because that could go so bad. But then again, it was a different time. Now, like I said, with your youngest, your sister, it's like, no, there's no drinking in the house. Your friends can't drink in the house because it's too much liability. It's too much liability. Now, granted, she's 21 now, so that's not even an issue. But a lot of you parents do say, hey, if you're going to drink, just drink at the house. Drink at the house because it's safe. I remember when you were 18, there's two incidents where I allowed you to have alcohol while you were under 21. And they were legal. They were both legal. They just weren't legal in the United States. Well, they weren't legal in California because one of them happened in Texas. And in Texas, you could drink at 18 if you were with your parent. And I remember we had gone to a trade show, and then we went to, I think it was called the Rustic Yard or something, but it was this cool outdoor restaurant, nightclub. It was like someone's backyard, but then you had about 1,000 people there, live bands and so forth. And for what the law was, is in Dallas, Texas, I don't know if it was a local ordinance or a state law, if you were 18 years old and you were with your parent and your parent allowed you to have a drink, you could have a drink. And me and you shared a blondie.
Oh yes, that was the first time that I tried beer, and it was a blondie
Yeah, it was under the stars in Dallas, Texas,
with a live
at this
band.
outdoor venue, live band. That was a lot of fun.
That was
And I'm
fun.
glad you didn't take a liking to it, because I don't think you really liked it. But I think it
did.
was just the experience and exposing you to that. At least it, I say that it created, it made you a more responsible uh, young adult as you started to, because now you just weren't so curious, like, oh, I've been there, done that before, And then the other time was, so then that happened. That was around May or June because you had just graduated. And then that 4th of July, we went to Papa's and Beer in Rosarito. Dad took you to Papa's and Beer in Rosarito.
I remember.
We took the whole family. We rented a beach house, and you were going to a breakup.
Wait, Dad didn't just take me to Papa's and Beer. I almost felt like I was being pimped out, and I say that like very loosely. But yeah, let's talk about how embarrassing that was.
Well, let's talk about, so you're going through a breakup. You're sad, a lot of crying and emotions. Not sure which boyfriend it was. Sure. It was a boy from high school. And so then you were sad, and we went to Rosarito for 4th of July. You know what? I said, you know what? You're 18. I'm going to take you to Papa's a Beer. I took you to Papa's a Beer. And this dad was such a cool dad that I felt so bad that you were sad that I literally started going up to groups of young men that I thought were suitable, that
What?
weren't indulging in like alcohol, and just felt like, oh, and yeah, have them come over and,
Wait, I'm sorry, hold on. We've talked about this story for a very long time. Are you bullshitting right now? Did you really do that? Because I was not aware of that. I thought you were going to the bathroom.
no,
Oh, wow. Okay. Live, I am hearing another part of this story that I never knew before.
I know. I'd walk by like, hey, um, you guys with any girls? Hey, my daughter's here. She wants to break up and hey, come over and hang out for a little bit. You guys want to dance? What was wrong with that? I just wanted to have a good time. But I always get under my observation.
No, don't do that. Don't ever do that again.
Hey, I was just trying to help you out.
Oh my
I just
gosh.
wanted to
Oh
see
my
what
gosh.
happened.
This is sounding so much more embarrassing now. I was talking about the fact that a guy came up to me, and again, I had went with you like towards the bathroom, and he had been talking to me by the bar, and then he was talking to me and I said, "Oh, I'm here with my dad." And then you came out of the bathroom and we were right there talking, and he was with his friend, and then you were like, "Oh, you can take her to dance." And he was like, "Oh no, it's okay." Cause I think he felt intimidated. And you were like, "No, really, don't be a, basically don't be a
I said, don't be a bitch.
yeah, you said don't be a bitch." And I was like, "Oh my God." And he just like totally felt uncomfortable and was just like, "No, it's okay." And then, he walked away. That's what I was talking about. Not the you going up to guys that I just learned about.
I just wanted you to enjoy the weekend.
Okay. Well, I got an interesting story out of it.
Okay, then maybe it's time to move on to another topic. So,
Yeah.
but you know what? Before we transition out of this one, um, very important to have that conversation with your kids about drinking. Not only drinking and driving, but just drinking in general. And I'm going to take it one step further. And I don't know, did we have a code word when you guys were out at with friends and stuff? If you felt uncomfortable,
I don't
we never
remember.
created that, huh?
I
Yeah, no.
don't think
Okay, with your sisters, we did, but I had stumbled on something years ago, and basically it was if to have this conversation with your kids, and if they're ever feeling uncomfortable, they don't want to stay at someone's house, or they're being peer pressured to drink or to use drugs, text us, and then basically use a code word, and then we would call and say, "Hey, you need to come home right now." Like, no, I need you to come home. And that would basically, so I'll use sister example. So we had a code word with your sisters, and if they ever felt uncomfortable, they would go ahead and text and basically give the code word, and then that was our cue to call them and say, "Hey, you need to come home right now." No, I don't care. So it allowed them to save face and be able to exit that uncomfortable situation without having to give an explanation.
Oh, I like that. Okay, that's something that we didn't have. Let's just remember, I wasn't allowed to go anywhere, for the record. No parties, no kickbacks. No, I think I barely went to like one or two in my whole like high school life. So I do like that. I do think that that's something that you should definitely set up with your kids. I have something like that set up with my friends to this day, and with the family, but not something that we had when I was younger. Because again, my dad was super strict and didn't get to do nothing.
And now looking back, yes, I was over controlling and super strict, but that's because to me, parties when I was, your age and in high school and so forth, all these parties ended up in shootings and stabbings and fights mm, so that stayed with me. So as you got into that age, I didn't want you being exposed to it because I have a lot of friends that never ever made it home from the party. They never made it home. They ended up dead. And not one or two, it's dozens. And I know it was a different time. And of course, it was the people that I surrounded myself around. So it wasn't a good element. And I know that you didn't surround yourself around that gang life, so to speak. But it stayed with me. It traumatized me. So I was so afraid of you going to a party and getting shot in the head or something. And because of that, I, you know, yeah, I was super strict. And I look back now and I do feel bad that you missed out on a lot of opportunities, a house parties or this, that. But then a lot of them also turned bad too. You know, there were some of the parties that your school, you guys had and turned into fights and shooting stuff. So house parties are dangerous.
Well, I never knew the reasoning behind that, but I mean, I guess I don't regret it. I mean, I'm older now, so not going and not being exposed to more peer pressure or alcohol or anything like that did work in my benefit, where I was always very responsible. But yeah, house parties can be dangerous. You never know what can happen.
You know, what are your thoughts? Because you're a lot younger. What are your thoughts on, um, especially, in today's day and age, so we're in 2025 and kids wanting to go to these parties, house parties and so, do you think they should be allowed to go? Because there's going to be drugs and alcohol at most of these parties. Let's just not beat
Possibly.
around the bush. Beat around the bush. Let's beat around the bush, okay? This is water, not vodka.
Um, I don't really have much of an opinion on it because, again, I wasn't allowed to go to any of these things. I really don't know what they were like. But again, going back to the having those conversations with your kids, having those conversations with your nieces and nephews, if the parents aren't having them, because there will be peer pressure around. And if there is alcohol and any type of drugs that are there, to understand and have the education about what that looks like, how to identify it with people. You could go as far as that, and just to teach them to not indulge in that, that there will be plenty of time and there'll be plenty of time to go out and go to parties. I mean, I remember the mentality that I grew up with was you told me, don't worry about these parties. Don't worry about the little parties here and there. Just wait till you're 21 and I'll take you to Vegas and we'll party out there. And that's something that you did hold your word to. We did go for my 21st birthday to Vegas and I got to experience the big clubs out there. And we did a club crawl. So that was how you presented it to me, and I was receptive to that because I loved Vegas. I grew up out there, and all I wanted to do was experience all of Vegas. Um, that's also a tactic I would say that you can also use is, house parties are gonna come and go, and they're always gonna be there, with kids that are young and especially in high school age, but just wait. You have plenty of time to drink. And also maybe talk about how it's an unnecessary toxin that you are putting into your body, and wait until you can be in a cool bar or in that cool speakeasy or going to Vegas and doing that instead of not basically wasting your time at these parties.
It's funny that you mentioned Vegas. I'm actually in Vegas right now. Um, yeah, you guys lived in Vegas. We used to go to Vegas 5, 6, 7 times a year, and we would go for 5, 7, 10 days at a time. We'd rent a suite, come out here. Dad had a little bit of a like to play, at the tables and stuff. So, um, yeah, you guys grew up in Vegas.
Yes, very much. We knew everything that you could do out there when you were under the age of 21. And believe me, there was a lot and there is still a lot.
Yeah, if I ever had to walk into another M&M store, I would probably jump off the third story building of the M&M.
You're being dramatic. It wasn't that bad.
Uh, you didn't see,
They have the Hershey's too.
well, the Hershey's too. Yeah.
Stuff.
Well, it was the expense, walking out with $200,
Oh, I see that.
M&M. Yes. So, but in all seriousness, have conversations with your children about, if you are going to allow them to go to these parties, but also, track the location. Have this conversation about, being able to have their location so that at least you know where they're at. I know when your sisters, we allowed them to go to some parties, and but we knew where they were at. And I'll tell you now, and they may see this one day, but I would drive by. I would park out there and just kind of monitor what was going on. Or sometimes I would have people in my circle go and park there, or even pay people to just monitor, to be on standby. So,
Wait,
even though they
I
thought they
could
were
have got
there,
paid for that and I didn't get paid for that?
well, yeah, because I didn't want you to blow the sister code, right? You guys, this is a code you guys have, but what they don't know, well, now they know. Well, now they'll know because I'm exposing it. But whenever they were at a kickback or a party, you could pretty much be certain that, me or my people were literally no more than about 500 feet away.
That sounds on brand, but also I would do the same thing as a parent. I think I would definitely be driving by just to make sure and see what's going on And also, I would definitely have their location.
You know, um, since we're talking about this topic, you know, if your child, young adult, decides to drink and they call you, the first thing to do is not to scold them. Be thankful that they called you. Go and pick them up. Go and pick them up so they don't drink and drive. Call an Uber, do whatever it takes, but just get them home. Because my parenting style was I ruled with an iron fist. And in a lot of ways that hurt the relationship because, and you'll be able to speak on that in a minute, but you guys were afraid of me. And if you would have called and been drunk under the influence, there was going to be hell to pay. And because of that, that wouldn't have happened. You would have found a way to get home. You would have found a way to try to, even if it meant driving just to get home so you wouldn't get in trouble. Is that making sense or am I just blabbing on? You get what I'm trying to say, right? When parents are too strict and don't give them that safe space to be able to say, hey, if you drink, even though I don't condone it, if you drink, we're not going to have a conversation the night. There's going to be a conversation the next day, but I'm not going to, well, there may be some grounding, but that night is not going to be the time to scold you or yell at you or to call you names. The most important thing is going to be to get you home. And if you drove with other people, if you drove with friends, it's to get them home to safety. And then we'll have this conversation. But don't instill this fear in your kids that they can't call you when they need you. That's what I'm trying to say. Is that making sense?
No, it does. I definitely, just for me, I would have had more sense to not get in the car with somebody who was drinking just because that was me. But you have to create a safe place for your children to be able to call you if something happens, especially if they're drinking, even if they know that they're not supposed to be drinking. If that's something that does happen, don't scold them that night. Just go and pick them up. Just, you obviously show that you care. Have the conversation the next day, because no matter what you say, it's not going to be heard that night. One, if they're drinking too much and they just can't understand you, or two, because they're embarrassed or they're scared of what's going to happen when they go home. Don't have a conversation until the next day. And then you can address what happened. But also, when you address what happened, also just make sure that you express your gratitude that they did call you, or let them know that you're proud of them, even though, yes, there are going to be consequences and you did this thing that you weren't allowed to do, but I'm glad that you called me, because that just affirms that they have a safe space, that they can give you a call, whether they are underage or even if they're overage and say they still live with you. Make sure that they have that safe space, because there could be so many other dire consequences by them trying to get creative and find a way to get around it, instead of just feeling safe enough to own up to their mistake and being able to come to their parent and know that their parent is going to care for them. And, is just to avoid a lot of other things that can happen.
Now, wait a minute. You said I didn't let you go anywhere. I recall when we had moved, from, was it you that, no, it wasn't you. It was your sister that I drove her from like San Clemente all the way back up to Victorville to go to Quinceañera. But no, wait a minute. I remember letting you go to a kickback with a family friend who lived with us. And she was like your older sister. She was a couple years older. But how much older is she? A year, 2 years?
She's a couple of years older.
Couple years older. She is. Okay. And you guys went and hung out. Where did you guys go, by the way?
We went to a house.
You went to your house and you got buzzed. And you came home buzzed. Actually, you came home intoxicated. Let's just keep it
I
real.
came home buzzed. I wasn't even that intoxicated.
And you came home acting a fool.
I did not come home acting a fool. I was more.
Thought you were gonna.
I was more scared, and I was more like, I got this. It's okay. Even though my dad was a cop, I can fool him. Didn't know he was gonna make me take a sobriety test.
Yeah, I did. I made you take a sobriety test right in the hallway. You're goddamn right. I made you take a sobriety test and you failed.
Okay, the one time,
And the gum or the mint or whatever you try to cover it up with, it didn't work. It didn't work, Alyssa.
or the Jack in the Box French fries.
Didn't work. You reeked of alcohol.
Okay, so I never got to go anywhere except for like one
Why
or
did
two
you have
times.
to go over?
What?
What?
We didn't have Uber or Lyft or anything back then, and my friend wasn't the one that drove. That's something that I stick to. I never got into a car with somebody that had been drinking.
And that's powerful to teach your children, is to never get in the car with someone that's been drinking.
I
I
never
don't care
let them
whether they
drive.
had one drink or just even don't get in the car. Because they don't have the experience or the capacity to regulate and know how much is too much.
That was one thing that I stood by. I didn't trust anybody. I just couldn't trust anybody to do that. But there was that one time that I did do that. But but I'm older now, so like that's just in the past. So like we could just move on from that. Like it happened. Also, I remember I didn't get scolded that night, but I think that you said that you were disappointed, and that hit me even harder than anything, because the next day, that's when the conversation happened, and I actually was terrified to come downstairs. But you definitely did speak loudly. That I do remember. You definitely were like, "How are you doing?" And knowing that I probably was hungover. So yeah, that was met.
I think I offered you more alcohol. Like, here, you want a drink? You think you're big? You're a big girl? Here, come and have some more. And a
I need
mistake. I think I brought a bottle to you and said, come on, let's drink.
that night before you did.
That's right. Before you went to sleep, I pulled out the alcohol because we had a full bar in the house. That was it. That was a party house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
you
also,
know,
like, if you're going to be the party house, have the conversation with your kids and also be mindful about your alcohol and your alcohol levels. And if they're not disappearing, because I've heard that that's something that also does happen.
and just know that if you're a parent and you act a fool and you drink too much and you act stupid, then know that you're setting the tone, you're setting the example for your kids. Let's just have this conversation. People are going to get pissed off, but there's a lot of parents that shouldn't be fucking drinking.
There's a lot of parents that shouldn't be drinking
I've
or
seen
should know their
them.
limit.
I've seen them at parties. I've seen them at family parties. Just keeping it real. Some people shouldn't be fucking drinking. You don't have to comment. I'll take the brute for that because I don't give a fuck. Okay, so let's transition out of this. And as we start to close out this episode of Fatherhood Voices, and we've talked about some very pretty important things. We talked about dating, and definitely that a 13-year-old should not be dating. And we talked about alcohol, very important, and then just having conversations. I think that the real magic recipe that came out of today's episode, and it was a little bit different because I wanted to touch on some topics that people have, as the following is growing, I'm getting a lot more DMs and messages and where people are reaching out saying, hey, how about this topic? How about this topic? Hey, can you talk about this? So I think this was good to just give a perspective. And like I said, this is just our perspective. It doesn't mean it's the right one, but we're just I'm sharing from how I raised you guys and some things I did right, some things I did wrong. And then you, on the other hand, being the brunt of it, you're sharing what worked and what didn't work. But I think the common denominator here is communication. That's the most important thing.
Yes, it is. Communication is the most important thing. Have those conversations with your kids. Just about anything and everything that are around those topics, give them the education. Because if you think that they're not getting it, they're probably going to get it from somewhere else. Even if it's going to be uncomfortable, you got to do it. You got to do it to protect your kids. Have those conversations. Set the expectations, set the boundaries. Even if they don't follow them, you need to put those boundaries in place and stay aware.
So, I want to end today's podcast talking about something funny that happened last week. Well,
doesn't involve me, right?
It actually does.
Oh,
it
man.
does. And actually it's funny, but it's not funny. It's a little bit embarrassing, but as you've started to take a more active role in the whole organization with Aloha Imports and Sweet Peace Raise a Business and Fatherhood Voices and in the real estate, you're getting more and more access to a lot of documents. So we were going through and you were going to start helping with some of the behind the scenes stuff with Fatherhood Voices, the SOPs, standard operating procedures that were built out by the previous team and so forth. And you asked for access to the documents, the G Suites and the folders and so forth. And I remember just saying, okay, yeah. And I gave you the access. And lo and behold, not even thinking about it, but I forgot there was some confidential information in there.
Oh,
Some confidential information that was not meant for your eyes.
oh, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. It was a document. It was called
Assets and liabilities?
Assets and Liabilities, People's Assets and Liabilities. And that was a document that was not for your eyes. It was for my eyes and my inner circle core team at the time. I remember getting a call. It was last Wednesday or Thursday, and it started off with, "Oh, hey," and it was late. It was late in the night, and all of a sudden you said, "Oh, um, I want to talk to you about this document," and then you were kind of laughing about it, but it was one of those laughs like, "Yeah, I'm laughing, but I'm really hurt. I'm actually pissed off, but I don't know how to regulate my feelings right now." Um, And then you went on to expose this document that you found, and I'll let you explain what it was, but just so you know, it wasn't for your eyes. And not only that, it was a long time ago. It was like a year and a half ago. You've come a long way since then. But yeah, tell us about this document that you unraveled as you were being nosy. And I gave you one task to I gave you a
Okay.
task to do. Okay, wait a minute. I gave you a certain specific task to do, and it wasn't to go through all the documents
I
and
wasn't going through all of the
folders
documents.
and then
I had
just
to
kind of unraveling.
understand the brand. I was trying to understand what we were doing. And by the way, the specific document that I was looking for was not labeled the way that it should have been labeled.
So
That would have been
what should have been labeled? Um, different potential team members. Uh,
no, that's different. I'm talking about my task. But
for
now that I
instance,
think about it, had I thought about it, I should have just like searched that drive with the name of what I was looking for, but I wasn't thinking that at
exactly.
the
You should
time.
have searched
I
a
was like,
driver
okay.
specifically the task I
Anyways,
gave you,
I
not the
still came
task
across
of
the
going through
document
each
because
document.
the stuff was in different documents. So it wasn't like it was in the same one. It was in multiple documents spread out, and I needed to get all of them. So I had to go through.
You should just pretty
So
much be nosy is what she's
okay.
saying.
Anyways, I'm helping run it. So like whatever, like I had access to it. Okay. So basically, it was just like team members, and it was listed out, and everyone else's was general. It was just like basically, it was the strengths and weaknesses. Okay. And like, okay, once I seen it, I said, oh, I don't think this is something that I'm supposed to see. This has like team members on there. But you weren't on there. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. And then I just scrolled down and I seen my name. I said, oh, I'm on here. And then I seen my weaknesses. And I was like, wow, okay, who wrote this? It, just said like ego, emotional, can't take direction from inward or from men in general. And I was like,
Wait. Ego. Wait. Start over again. Okay, start over again. What did
no,
it say? Okay, ego. It said you cannot
ego,
work. You cannot take directions from
emotional,
men.
couldn't take direction from Edward or from men in general. So
Oh,
I'm assuming that you wrote the document, even though that you didn't, were just, going around it. If you didn't write it, it was somebody else who wrote it up. But I'm sure that those came out of conversation. So no matter who edited the document, I'm pretty sure it came from you,
wow.
which in self-reflection after I got off the phone and stuff, I was kind of like, okay, so maybe the emotional, it's still a little valid. But hey, I can self-reflect, but also, okay.
It hurt you, didn't it?
Uh,
It's,
I
it's got the
I thought
bullshit.
it was
It doesn't
funny.
matter. Huh?
I kind of thought it was funny, but I was a little hurt though. I was a little hurt because I was like, wow, this is a very the statement was very bold, and the things that were under it were very bold, and they could only come from you. Because I didn't really work long enough or know anybody long enough to say that with anyone else.
Well, but and what made you think it wasn't collective of just analyzing everybody,
No,
team members and potential.
I'm pretty sure it was you. I didn't work
But
that long with everyone else.
but looking. So let me ask you a question. Looking back, if we can have an honest conversation here, when you go back and look, because you've come a long way in the last year. Okay, so and then I'm proud of you for the growth that you've had. And looking back, can you honestly say that um, the document was? Um, do you think it was over exaggerated, or do you think it was pretty on point? Honestly, do you think it was a
No,
realistic perspective of how people saw you?
I can see where part of it was on point. I will do the self-reflection to say yes. Some of that stuff was on point. As bold as the statement were, I wasn't prepared to see it in that way, explained in that way, but yes, I can say, and I've definitely come a long way, so there's a lot of things that don't apply to today.
So, okay. Well, this has been a interesting episode, and some secrets are unraveled. Some things that you didn't know that were just
Mm.
exposed the last hour.
Yep.
Ah,
Can't wait for you to come back.
the truth sells. The truth shall set you free. So, so what are we in from here? Should we wrap it up?
We should wrap it up.
We wrap it up. Any closing thoughts with any of the topics we touched on today?
Other than just speak with your children, just have those conversations. And if you need some guidance in those conversations, feel free to reach out to us. I can give you some perspectives from a child and from an extreme restrictive household on how that helped me develop and also how it hindered my development from being in a home that was very restrictive, where I couldn't just go and talk to my dad or, didn't feel like I could talk to my parents because I had a dad who was very controlling and overbearing.
You know, out of a lot of podcasts, we pulled out different resources and workbooks that we offer for free. I'm going to challenge you to take the lead on creating a small PDF that we can give to parents for free on how to start to have these conversations with their kids, whether it's around sex, alcohol, drugs, etc. So we're going to collaborate on this together. But yeah, let's turn this into a PDF that we can offer as a free resource, because there's a lot of parents that don't know how to have the conversation, especially if they aren't, you know, maybe seeing eye to eye with their kids, which a lot of parents had, when their kids are at that age of, between teenage years and the high school years, a lot of times they don't see eye to eye. And a big part of it is differences in just the times that they were raised versus the kids now. So I think this would be a great resource to be able to put on not only the website, but also on the Milkshake page that offers tools and resources that parents can use a guide to be able to help them to start the conversation with their children.
Yeah, no, I love that. I would definitely want to collaborate on something like that and provide that resource for parents.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of Fatherhood Voices. Now, next week's episode is going to be a doozy, because we're going to have somebody on who years later, as he was an adult, discovered that his mom wasn't his mom. And then, to make matters even more complicated, his son was going through and messing with his DNA stuff and ancestry. And then he discovered that his dad wasn't his dad. All evolved over the last 18 months. And that's going to be a interesting story, because there's a lot of families that are starting to unravel because of this ancestry.com and Me18.
23andMe,
What are these different ones called?
23andMe, Ancestry.
Oh, yeah, they're starting to destroy some families.
They are definitely bringing a lot of stuff to light. I can
Yeah.
say that much.
And, just for the record, so just so I put out that you guys are never allowed to go ahead and get your DNA sample.
Oh, don't worry. I do not want to. Mm.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Fatherhood Voices, and look forward to seeing you next week for another one.